All right. So today we are talking about meltdowns. So what I usually like to help people understand first is the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. So a tantrum is something that occurs, I think, usually when I think of a tantrum, I think of like the terrible twos and a kid who wants something or needs something, they're told no, they are trying to get their way, they have a tantrum. So it's a means to an end. It's a way for them to try to get their needs met, probably because they don't have any other skills that they can use to more appropriately get their wants or needs met. So generally speaking, a tantrum will stop when the goal is achieved or when their want or need gets met, or when it's no longer serving its purpose. So if they're throwing a tantrum and they're still not getting their wants and needs met, and they've completely exhausted themselves, they might just decide this isn't worth it anymore and it will stop. So the child does have some degree of control over themselves and their behavior when we're talking specifically about a tantrum. In individuals with autism or other disabilities, when we talk about meltdowns, we're talking about sensory overload or sensory deprivation. Generally, it's sensory overload, but the opposite can happen. So if at any point I say just like sensory overload, I do mean both. I'm just so used to saying sensory overload. And it can be very high stress, high anxiety. If you go to an unfamiliar place with lots of people and new sounds and new images and all these things that can be extremely stressful, it can cause a mental and emotional overload. So, unfortunately, these kiddos, their brains don't process all the sensory information they're receiving in the same way that I or someone participating in this discussion might. Um, so they might process it differently, or some people might just have, they might be a little slower in their processing, and some other people might just not be able to process it. Um, so, in a big way that you can tell the difference between a meltdown and a tantrum is that a meltdown will continue even when you think their needs are met. So, if you take your child to the Erie County Fair, that can be very overwhelming, very sensory oriented. So even when you remove the child from the fair and decrease that sensory input, the meltdown doesn't just end. It's not an on and off switch. It's still going to continue until their sensory system can stabilize and they can kind of work it out and get back to kind of their typical self. Sometimes it will end because they're just completely worn out and their body just can't do it anymore. And that's kind of like a defense mechanism. It's the brain's way of protecting you. And they do temporarily lack control over their mind or body. I don't want to say that it's necessarily an involuntary response like blinking or breathing, but it's when you don't have the knowledge, the skills, the ability, the processing that you need to manage your own sensory environment, then your body's going to do what it needs to do to help you get through that situation. And if that means you have something that looks very much like a tantrum because you have no way of better expressing what you're experiencing, or you put your hands over your ears and scream, or whatever that might look like, that is their way of trying to cope with the situation. Okay. We're gonna go off a little bit here. I added this slide after the first couple times I did this presentation. I got questions about this regarding tracking and what to track and what that information might tell us. So when you're tracking behaviors, specifically for our discussion today, if you're trying to track meltdowns, it's important to know what the triggering event is, or the word you commonly hear is antecedent. It's a big word. I like trigger better. It's easier to remember, I think. And the best way to help identify triggers and like early warning signs is to track behavior and then look for trends in the data. Some people, I've heard a lot of people say, not some, tons, say, I don't know what the trigger is. It wasn't triggered by anything. It just came out of nowhere. It does come out of nowhere. It can be like they're going from 0 to 60 in a split second, but everything is preceded by something else. So before I signed on to the Zoom meeting today, I had to turn on my computer. Before I could turn on my computer, I had to, wake up and take a shower. So it might seem completely innocuous. It might seem like it's not at all related, but until you track the data and look at the trends, it could be related. So what if every day, and I'm going to use a simple example, way back when, in the 2019, when kids would get on the school bus every morning, if every morning at 7:15, and the bus comes at 7:20, at 7:15 every day, your child has a meltdown. That could be because they're getting anxious, they're getting stressed out. They know that the bus is a highly sensory environment. It's very noisy, it's very loud, it's very bright, it's very bumpy. Okay, so that could be something you might be like, okay, it's the school bus. But through tracking the data, you find out that, oh, well, the meltdowns actually occur on the days when they have cereal for breakfast instead of toast. So it just happens to be the same time every day because you also have breakfast around the same time every day. So in that case, we might say, okay, maybe they're having a little bit of stomach upset from milk. Maybe they are lactose intolerant. So it might look like one thing, but it might be another. So until you track that, you might not, because I don't memorize what I have for breakfast every day and been like, oh, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday last week I ate cereal. Like, I don't think most people just hold that information in their memory to discover those patterns. So I think that that's very important because I am a huge fan of proactive behavior interventions and strategies, which is trying to get out in front of the behavior and identify those triggers and early warning signs and try to stop it in its tracks before it gets out of control. I think everybody could agree that if we could stop a tantrum or a meltdown before it started, that's going to be most ideal. So when you are tracking behavior, it doesn't have to be rocket scientist. If you have kids that go to Summit, you might see they always have someone sitting in the back of the classroom like tallying every time a kid says a cuss word or something like that. I don't expect parents to do things like that. It's a little tedious. But just, the day and the time, even if you don't know, like if it was like roughly 7 o'clock because it was about 15 minutes before the bus came, whatever. Who was present or who was targeted? So was it just the mom and the child? Was it the kiddo outside playing with their siblings? Was it the whole family was home? Those things can be important again because if it's something a specific person is doing, that might be leading to the meltdowns, that's important information to document. And then what is the behavior? And if you're using this just for your own purposes, you could just, if they're kicking, you could just put a K and then say, I think they kicked me about 5 times, and then just write K5. Just something so that you know what it is. How long did it last? So if you're normally seeing like 5 to 10 minutes of meltdown behavior, and then one day it goes on for an hour and a half. Okay, there's something very significant about that event. It's different. Something is different is going on. Or if normally it happens just with mom, and this one day out of the blue, it was, with the babysitter. Okay, that's really good information. And then what happened before it started? So At this point, you don't really know if it's a trigger, you just know what happened beforehand. So like we talked about, maybe it was the anticipation of the school bus, maybe it's what they ate for breakfast. So if you can think back a couple steps and just think like, okay, what did we do right before this? And then what did we do right before that? And again, you don't have to write an essay. You can just write something like, wait for bus, Captain Crunch, which, whatever it is, I don't know. I had a 7-year-old laughing at me because I like Captain Crunch. He said I was too old to eat Captain Crunch. I don't know what that means. um, and then if you did something, and how they responded to that. So if you tried to give them their weighted blanket and they ended up, throwing it at you, okay, you could write down like blanket, and then you could just put like a sad face or a thumbs down, or like, again, you don't have to write a dissertation. Did it make it better or worse? Did it have no impact? So maybe you gave them the blanket, they accepted the blanket, they kind of sat there with it, but the meltdown continued. It didn't get better, it didn't get worse. So it's just kind of, you could put like an equal sign for like no impact. And then what was the eventual end or outcome? Did it get so bad? Unfortunately, there are circumstances where someone might have to call the police if someone is at risk of hurting themselves or others. Did they get completely exhausted and just tire themselves out and fall asleep on the couch? Um, did, and I am not an advocate of physically restraining individuals, but I have seen some circumstances where a parent has had to, hold on to their child, to help other people safe. So know what those outcomes are. So when we have something that has a good outcome, we can track that data too. Okay, and then through that data, as we kind of talked about, when we started this slide, you can identify things that are possible triggers or antecedents. You can identify patterns and trends. You can look at what works and what doesn't work. And the more data, the more information that you have, about all this tracking stuff, about the behaviors, the better able you will be to use the proactive strategies, some of which we are going to talk about today. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second if anyone has a question about that, because that is new information that I put in here. All right. All right. The much coveted proactive strategies. So this is when you want to try to prevent the meltdown from occurring. So we talked a little bit about knowing what triggers your child, and you have to do that through reviewing the data that you have. Even in a circumstance, like if it's the first meltdown or you don't have enough data to identify possible triggers yet, just be aware of your surroundings. Is this a new environment? Is it very noisy? Is it very bright? Is it crowded and you're getting bumped up against and kind of jostled around? Have you been walking for a very long time and maybe they're getting a little too much movement? So being aware of your surroundings and having some knowledge of warning signs. Yes, these things can occur very quickly. Most of the time, with significant amounts of observation, you'll eventually be able to identify warning signs. So maybe when someone's starting to get overstimulated, they might rock a little bit harder. There was one kiddo that I was working with, who he always rocked. But when he was getting a little worked up, he would like rock and like slam his arms down at the same time, like on like the arms of the chair or whatever he was rocking in. Other kids, like if they do some of that like hand wringing, they might do it a little more violently, or they might grab like someone else's hand and kind of squeeze on it and rub on it. Like that might be an indicator that like they're starting to get a little bit worked up. I'm trying to think of some other examples. when kids are playing video games, if they're very visually stimulating, lots of movements, lots of people, characters running around doing things, if your child starts like yelling at the video game or inching closer up to the screen or mashing the buttons on the controller harder, those are all potential warning signs. So that's your opportunity to intervene. So in our video game example, if you said to your kiddo, like, it looks like you're getting a little worked up playing your video game, why don't we hit pause? Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Okay, how many people's kids are just going to be like, okay, mom? Like, probably none of them, right? Very few. So you want to try to break or make a temporary stoppage in their receipt of the sensory input. So maybe you have to walk in between your child and the video game and break their line of sight and say, if we pause the game and take a break, then we can come back to it in a few minutes when you're calm. If you can get them to pause it, if you can get them to make eye contact. So I think a lot of times kids don't want to stop what they're doing to take a break because they have, and some teenager taught me this, FOMO, F-O-M-O, fear of missing out. Okay, so they think like they're gonna walk away from their video game and I don't know, it's gonna come to life or something. I don't know what they would miss out on. So they can come back to it, especially if they can take that off ramp when that early warning sign is recognized and kind of work on regaining their self-control, they can go back to it. And if you regularly recognize that those warning signs when playing video games tend to happen about every 30 minutes, well, now every 20 minutes, let's take a 5-minute break. And as long as they're regaining their control and their composure, they can return to it for, whatever amount of time they're allowed to play video games. Visit new places in advance. So if it's a new school, I don't know, people don't really go anymore. If they're going to be going to a friend's house for a birthday party, again, not something that really happens much anymore. If trying to think of other examples. So you're going to be moving into a new house. If they're going to be moving their bedroom somewhere else, like spend some time in that new place. Go there and visit it. If they have like an online virtual tour, that's something that you could do. And chances are, if your child wants to go to another friend's house and play, I would hope that those parents know that your child has a disability and that might come with some differences. And so if you're like, hey, I know we have a play date on Friday, he's very anxious about it, can we just come, and just stay here for like 5 or 10 minutes, let him look around, so that way it's easier for him and he can hopefully play more successfully when we come for our play date on Friday. Or again, with not knowing what's happening with schools, if kids are going to be in different classrooms and things are going to be restructured, and there's going to be one of the school districts built like little plexiglass like dividers in the middle of all their classrooms. Like, if I was a kiddo, I'd want to go and experience that and kind of see what it looks like so I can be familiar and prepare myself for that. So these are all proactive things that you can do. And then social stories are also very good. I think there's 4 or 5 social stories on our website right now that are all related to like COVID-19. So there was one that we did when the school year was officially canceled back in whatever month that was, April, May. There's one about wearing masks. There's another one about social distancing. There's one about parents working from home. So you can go on. Those are in English and Spanish. So you can go on and get those, download them if you want. Those are good ways to help kids understand what to prepare for, and so that's proactive. The last proactive strategy, like one of my favorite, is making like a little, I call it like a go bag. There's those little like drawstring backpacks that you get if you go to any like race walks, fundraising events, stuff like that. They give them out a lot of the time with like little goodies in them. Use something like that. And whatever it is that helps to keep them calm or helps them to self-soothe, something to help reduce the sensory input and kind of filter out some of the sensory environment so they're not receiving as much, whether that's sunglasses, noise canceling headphones, weighted blankets, if they just need fidgets, if they use earplugs, there's those little chewy necklaces now, which are handy, and they're kind of cute too. They're kind of decorative. Any preferred items, and also be prepared with an exit strategy. So if you're going to the Erie County Fair, like know how you're gonna get out of there, because if you get lost and you're wandering around, your kid's having a meltdown, and you're like, oh, but I have the noise canceling headphones and the the fidget spinner and stuff in the car. Okay, but you got to get out of the Erie County Fair first if it's in your car. So know how you're getting out of there. Or if you're at the mall, know the closest way out of the building. Even if you're outside and you have to walk extra through the parking lot, at least you're reducing the sensory stimuli that is likely leading to and triggering the meltdown. All right, here's just, I actually created this for a different presentation that I did, but this is just like, and I just completely made something up in terms of sample tracking. So you can just see there's a section for date and time, who and where, what happened before the behavior, what the behavior actually was, how long it lasted, what you did when it happened, and then the response I just put plus minus equals. So what did it have, a negative response, a good response, or didn't really do anything? And then kind of how did it resolve? When or how did the child calm down? So through this example, if we just want to take a minute and look at it, and then I will ask you guys if just through these 4 little lines of tracking, if there's anything that you see in here that might lead us to identify some triggers in those behaviors. Does anyone have any ideas on what they're reading? Sorry for the people who are just on the phone. I used to drive around for work a lot, so I know about just being on the phone sometimes for things. And if no one wants to express their thoughts, that's fine too. Talking to a computer is a little weird until you do it all day, every day, and then it just kind of comes naturally.
I just wanted to add something. My
Sure.
son was just recently diagnosed with autism.
Okay.
So we've been doing this. I mean, I'm a retired counselor, so we've been dealing with what was identified as mental health issues until he finally got the right assessment.
Okay.
And for him, it seems to be, we've handled a lot of it already, but if the limits are set, which could be a temper tantrum, but then his adjustment between things that are happening is a struggle for him.
Right.
So at least right now what's working is, like you said, preparing him ahead of time that, you have 10 more minutes and then we're headed for the store or things like that.
Yep.
But there are times, especially with video games, that does not work.
Okay.
And I guess maybe it's just what it is. We've limited the meltdowns much better.
That's
but
good.
we still get them.
Yeah. And completely eradicating meltdowns is probably,
Unrealistic.
yeah, it's just, I mean, if you think about any other kind of, whether it's a medical or mental health condition, like someone with diabetes, like they can have it very well controlled with diet and exercise, but are they sometimes going to have fluctuations in their blood sugar where, maybe they need some to get their medications changed, or they need to, eat something with a lot of sugar or whatever. Like,
Sure.
yeah, it's going to happen sometimes. So, but what would, being prepared and having all the skills and tools and everything that you need when it does happen, even if you can reduce it to an astonishing degree, like you kind of always want to keep that what if in your back pocket so that you're always kind of prepared.
Okay.
I had a friend who was diabetic and had an insulin pump, and one day her insulin pump like stopped working, and she had never, and I had known her for years, and we never really like talked about it. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do you need from me? Like, do you need more sugar? Do you need less sugar? Do I need to call for an ambulance? Do you need a doctor? Like, and she was just like, oh, I have insulin in a little cooler bag in my car. I just need that. I was like, oh, okay, I'll go get it for you. But
Mm-hmm.
thankfully, other people were in the office. She didn't lose consciousness or anything like that. But that's one of those circumstances where it's like, okay, we need, should this ever happen again, what do we do?
Sure.
So,
Sure.
um, so on my little chart here, did anyone have anything they wanted to share in my made up little chart? So there were a couple of things that I tried to sneak into this. I thought I was being clever. Maybe I'm not. So if we look at the times a day, you could say maybe that it's all close to meal time. So two of them are around lunchtime. Two of them could be around dinner time. Um, One of them's happens at the grocery store. Another one is resolved when he gets McDonald's. He, she, I don't know. I didn't make up a person's name. We'll call him Bob. Um, so maybe it's about hunger. Um, we can see that in the first example. Sometimes you might have to bribe your kids out of the store. It happens, right? So that's a good outcome, but we also don't want to teach like, oh, well, if he's having a tantrum and not a meltdown, now we're just giving them what they want. So there was a good response and it worked, but we might not want to continue. We might want to find other approaches that work. We see here that it happens with mom and with dad. It happens at home and in the community. Um, but there are all also times that might be overly stimulating. So you're in Walmart, very bright, very noisy, crowded, lots of different things to look at and play with. So could be sensory overload. Grocery shopping, same kind of idea. Playing video games. This one, they're just in the car, but so maybe you were at the Dollar Tree, so that could have been overly stimulating, and now they were able to keep it together while you were actually in the store, but now they're in the car and it just overwhelms them and they start having their meltdown. Maybe you're in the car and there's an accident on the highway, so there's lots of sirens and stuff, so it might be auditory. So but it's interesting to see, like, in the second line here, that the kind of reduced sensory stimuli also works, just like the having the McDonald's worked. Um, this third example here, nothing seemed to work, which is going to happen sometimes. Um, and this last one, you're in the car by yourself with your kiddo having a meltdown. Um, you got them home. That's important because being in the car or pulled over on the side of the road or something could be very unsafe. So, and sometimes, like when we look at this third example here, where it says you tried to give them anything and everything and nothing worked, those might be circumstances where the more you offer, the more they're getting overwhelmed. So if you have, and did I make it the next slide? Let me go back. I added a slide in here just last night, and so I don't remember where it's at, but we'll talk about it in a minute. So when you're receiving all this different sensory input, and then you have a parent saying like, here, okay, try coffee, try clicking a pen, drink some water, here's your weighted blanket. That could be adding extra stress along with the extra additional auditory stimuli from the parent or caregiver making verbal suggestions. There's additional tactile stimuli if you have someone keep handing you things. You have to process what you're being told, and then ultimately the person wants you to make a decision. And when your brain is already overloaded with information and someone's giving you more information, asking you to make a choice, that might be too much. And generally speaking, giving someone a choice of like two preferred items, like you can have an ice cream cone or a popsicle, right? Either way, a kid's gonna be like, yay. But if you are not in a mental space to make that decision, then that decision can be extremely overwhelming. So don't try to stop asking them what they want or need, or try to stop offering them things. Maybe if you know there's certain things that they prefer, like a stuffed animal to cuddle with and a weighted blanket, or sit it nearby. Don't say anything as long as they're safe. They're not hurting themselves or anyone else. Maybe, they're just rocking really violently and they need some time to get it out of their system, but no one's in danger and they just have to work through it. Leave them what they need, supervise from a distance to make sure that nothing changes, that they might be endangering themselves or others, and let them work through it and see if that helps. Because if you're a person who wants to please your mom or dad and try to calm down and take the things that they're giving you because they love you and they're just trying to help, but you can't manage anything else, and you can't manage to tell them like, hey mom, dad, I appreciate the effort, but I really just need some space. So sometimes doing nothing or doing very little could also be an intervention. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about some active strategies. So this is like, we're in the middle of a meltdown. We're in Walmart, kiddos laying on the floor, flailing, screaming, crying. People are looking at you like you got three heads, whatever it is. What are we going to do in those circumstances? So there's three things that I like to talk about. The first one is safety, because that has to come first. You have to keep yourself and other people safe, because if something happens and you get hurt, who's going to be helping your kiddo? Because most other people wouldn't know what to do. Okay. Managing yourself and your responses, and then reducing the stimulation. I have on here about notifying your first responders. I have a form that I'll share with you at the end if I don't talk too much. It's like information. I think it's called like information about a person with special needs. And it just talks about like, hey, I have someone with X, Y, or Z diagnosis living in my house. These are things that they like. These are things that they don't like. These are things that if you get a call from us or someone else calls, that you might really need to know. Maybe if they're completely nonverbal. Maybe if they like to play with a squirt gun, and so the police show up at your house and they start getting sprayed in the face with water, like whatever it might be. So things that people might need to know, and you can file those like with your local police and fire, and most police departments, like if a call comes in from your phone number or a response is needed at your address, they can access that information. So, all right. So number one, safety. Some of this stuff is common sense, but people just don't think of it in the moment, so we're going to talk about it. So when you're in public places, stay calm as much as humanly possible. Your kid's going to take on your demeanor. So I say, do Academy Award level acting. So pretend like you're, I don't know, a famous actress or actor, and you have to pretend like you got it all together and you know what's going on. And because if you start getting stressed out and start panicking, that's not going to help your kiddo to feel better. And then determine, like, is it safer to go or safer to stay, depending on what exactly a meltdown looks like for you and your family. Um, Sometimes it might be better to get the kid out of the store, out of wherever it is that you're at, and let them decompress, work through it in the car or something like that. Other people, if maybe the car is not a place that is good for your kid. Maybe they don't like being in the car, so maybe that's just going to make it worse. So maybe you decide to stay where you're at and get what you need, have what you need to help them work through it. Okay? Protecting yourself through whatever that looks like. If your child is trying to hit you, maybe you need a little bit of physical distance. Maybe you know that you can come up and give them a nice bear hug squeeze, and that pressure helps them to calm down long enough to get out of the store. If you have your go bag and it has whatever things they need for it, or if there's other people, sometimes people who are don't have the nicest intentions might come up and say something about the way you're parenting or your child being bad or things like that. But then there's other people who might have good intentions, and are trying to help, and they go up to the kid and be like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And then the kid bites their fingers. Okay, like, so your kid. Parents are the experts on their own kiddos. So if you need space, even whether someone has good intentions, bad intentions, whatever it is, like, you might just say, like, "Hey, he or she can sometimes be a little aggressive or violent. You might want to keep your distance." Okay, maybe you have to physically, like, put a cart on one side so no one walks that way. Whatever it is that you have to do to keep people safe. Ask for help if you need it. Depending on the size and intensity of the meltdown, if you're in a store, a mall, a public place, somebody, a manager, someone who has good or bad intentions, someone's going to be nearby. And don't be afraid to ask for help. So it might just be like, "Hey, if I hand you my phone, can you, like, I'll unlock it, can you call this emergency contact person for me? Because if I talk on the phone, it just makes it worse." Okay, there was a kid that I worked with for a while that was triggered. His parents could not talk on the phone ever, like, in his presence. He could not tolerate it for whatever reason. So maybe you have to ask someone else to do it. And if that person says no, or they can't do it, or maybe they don't want to get involved, whatever, just be like, "Could you please find, go ask for a store employee to come and provide me with some assistance." If there is someone that you can call, or if you know that the store is generally a very difficult place for your child to manage, maybe you have that conversation with a store manager or someone in advance, or when you first get there, and be like, "Hey, my kid's having a really hard time today. If we have a meltdown, this is what we'll need to do, and this is who we could call for help." And just make sure someone has that information. It's a hard thing to do. I don't like to ask for help. I like to think I can do everything myself all the time. That's not realistic. Sometimes people need help, and don't be afraid to ask for it. Most people, if they are unable to provide the assistance, at the very least, they will get someone who can help. And that way you can focus on, what do I need to do to make sure everybody's safe? Because someone else help is on the way. Okay. In the car, if you have child safety locks on your car, I would recommend using them. If you need, there's like seat belt covers and different gizmos so that if your kid likes to unbuckle themselves, it will stop them from doing that. When you're seated in the car, if you're the driver, have your kid diagonal behind you so they're sitting behind the passenger seat, especially if it's just two people in the car, because if your child is right behind you and you're driving, they can kick the seat, they can throw things at you, they can pull your hair, they can yank on your seat belt, all these different things. So maybe if you know they tend to throw things in the car, maybe move everything out of their reach, maybe take their shoes off their feet, because that's one thing, like you might be like, oh, I moved everything out of the way, but then they took their shoes off and started throwing them. So you know what? Then you don't wear shoes in the car anymore. So move everything out of their reach. And at least this way, again, if they're diagonal behind you, depending on the size and the arm length of your kid, they might still be able to grab you or things like that. But sometimes even split seconds can be the difference between, resolving something safely and then having it end disastrously. Okay. Again, ask for help. We're going to talk about using and making like a behavior plan, not in the way like when we think of like behavior services in your home, but just like a plan for you, yourself, your family, what to do so that everybody is having the same approaches. And pull pull into a parking lot, whatever you need. I've gotten crisis calls where I'm, have a family sitting on the side of the 90 during rush hour, and if it's either that or getting an accident, I guess you're pulled over on the side of the 90. And I'll be inching along, I'm coming, but it might take a little while. Okay. And then when you're at home, home is probably one of the harder environments unless you keep an extremely sterile home where you don't have any kind of knickknacks or doodads or kitchen utensils or anything. So either remove the person or remove everybody else from harm's way as much as possible. So if you're in the living room, there's a meltdown. Other kids might not like it, but Mom, that's not fair. Why do I always have to stop what I'm doing? Okay, you're right, it's not fair. It is what it is though. But sometimes you can redirect the child to a safe space. Maybe they have a room that they prefer where it's quiet, it's calm. They can slam themselves into their crash pad or whatever it is that they need. Again, protecting yourself. If you need to get like motion sensors or alarms, proximity alarms, things like that, so you know if someone's coming and going out of a specific area of the house, or if your child might work their way into the kitchen and is not aware of kitchen safety at all. There's like little things, like you can get some at Home Depot. They're relatively inexpensive, so that like if someone crosses this plane or this threshold, it'll start to beep or make an alert. You can also get ones on windows and doors so that like if the two sides are lining up, it doesn't make a noise, but if someone opens that door or window and the two pieces aren't lined up anymore, it'll start to make a noise. Then again, depending on your kiddo's cognitive abilities and their size, no matter if you try to put it up at the top out of reach or how handy they are at disassembling things. But especially for littler kids, it can be very effective. Use child proofing, even if you have an older kiddo. There's like the little doorknob guards. They can't get out and go outside and potentially go into the street. There's the same kind of thing for the knobs on the stove. If they tend to flail and thrash a lot, there's like the little corner protectors for like your coffee tables and countertops and stuff like that. So all those safety measures can be ways to help keep everybody safe. All right, any questions about safety? All right. So number 2 is managing yourself. And Carolyn, you probably recognize my little LAVA acronym here. I still use it. So when your child is having a meltdown, the more calm and neutral and compassionate and caring and just oozing with empathy that you can be, the better off the situation is going to be. Because the more you get stressed out, the more you raise your voice, the more you're anxious, the harder it is going to be for your child to calm down. So, and kids are really good at picking up on this stuff. There's this family I was working with, and right before I had gotten there, I had gotten a bad phone call about a family member being in the hospital. And I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I was like, okay, I got my goodie bag. What are we going to do today? Kind of stuff. And this kid's like, Miss Debbie, what's wrong? And like, it was so like, and I thought I was going to win an Academy Award. I thought I was acting stupendously. Okay. So even through my best efforts, they could still pick up on it. And if your kid knows that you're scared or you're anxious or you're stressed out, that's not very reassuring. When you're in a mental place, when you feel like you don't have any control, it's your parent, guardian, caregiver, teacher, whomever that you're looking at to help regain that control, to provide a sense of stability. So you need to get yourself in that good mental place. Whether you have a code word that you say to yourself, or if you have, I have little things called minute meditations. So if you have 60 seconds, you can do a little minute meditation. You like doing deep breathing activities, whatever it is, keep yourself calm. Be patient. People say that I have the patience of a saint. I don't think I do. I think I use up all my patience at work, and when I get home, I don't have any left. And I like this little quote. It's like my new favorite thing in the world, is that patience is the art of hoping. And I'm like, that is so perfect, because it actually is. Like, if you can just be patient long enough and hope that it's gonna like get better, it will. Be present but not pushy. So again, let your kid know that you're there. You're gonna provide whatever it is that they need to get through this situation, but you're not being like, here, take this, here, take this, here, take this. Because their mind and their body has to work through it. So you're there, you're present if they need you, but you're not pushing what you think they need. Again, a big difference maybe, I think Pamela, I think you said you were talking about a 3-year-old. So it might be a big difference between like a 3-year-old and how much supervision you're giving them, and a 16-year-old. Maybe a 16-year-old can be by themselves in the backyard while they're calming down, but a 3-year-old can't. So maybe you at least have to be out there with him. Or, if a 3-year-old is kind of flailing around, maybe not nearly as dangerous as a 16-year-old flailing around. Okay. And then this is my little acronym. LAVA, I used it when I did crisis intervention work. It's listen, acknowledge, validate, and avoid arguments. So if your kid is expressing that they need or want something, being an active listener when they're expressing that. So whether it's making eye contact, nodding, yeah, this is difficult, I hear you. So, and providing those statements of acknowledgement and validation that, I know that this is hard for you. I know the situation with school can be stressful. It's okay to feel those things. And the A for avoid arguments is because what we don't want to do is say something like, oh my goodness, you're such a whiner. Why are you so stressed out about school? It's going to be fine. Just get over it. Okay, so now you're denying what they're saying, they're feeling, and what their experience is. And again, depending on the developmental level of your child, you might also now be starting an argument, which again, in these circumstances, are not helpful. So, and I have my other little phrases here. I like what's it called? When all the sounds are the same. I can't think of the word right now. Alliteration. So that's why we had the Academy Award acting and modeling the mood. Okay, so those are my little phrases. So or modeling the mindset if you want. So if you want yelling and screaming, and then you can yell and scream. If you want someone to calm and be present and aware and alert, like, then you need to be those same things. Okay? So this is, we talked about this already, the modeling the mood and managing yourself. So, and I always share with people, did you know, maybe you didn't, that telemarketers, when they're trained, they're told to smile while they're on the phone. And people might say, well, that's silly, you're on the phone and you're, trying to sell a cruise or something, right? But if you just, right now with people wearing masks and stuff, right? Like, you don't have, it kind of cuts off 50% of your nonverbal skills, right? But you can still tell. You can tell someone's mood and their demeanor and how they're feeling about a specific situation based on whether they're frowning or smiling or happy or sad. And if you don't believe me, like, try it out with your spouse, your kids, people in the community. Like, when you're in a bad mood, smile, even if it's a big fake smile, like, behind that mask, and just be like, talk to your boss about whatever you're mad about, and it's going to come across a lot better. So just something to think about. Telemarketers, at least the cheerful ones, are smiling when they're on the phone. All right. Any questions about managing yourself? All right. And number 3 has kind of been sprinkled throughout this whole thing, which is reducing the sensory input. Okay. If, again, it's noisy, it's crowded, it's loud, it's bright, there's flashing lights, there's fireworks, there's all these things. Some of those things you can't control. Control what you can. Okay. Tell the sibling that someone has a meeting. Oh, thank you, Carolyn. If you want this recording, once they edit out all my ums and whatnot, I can send it to you. Thank you for joining us, and I'll email all the information as well. So, as much as possible, eliminate this sensory input that you can. So you got someone watching TV, someone else has the radio on, someone playing video games, this person likes all the lights on. Okay, as much as possible. You can't control some of the things, and I think it's the next slide that I made, this little graphic here. There's a lot of this stuff that's coming in, this sensory input coming in that you can't control. So here's your little kiddo, their brain, look how beat up and overwhelmed they are, okay? So this person in this graphic is more sensory to the auditory pieces. So we have all these sounds coming in. So there's traffic, the dog is barking, video games, there are siblings watching TV, the parents in the kitchen banging pots and pans, other people are talking, the floor is creaky, right? So those are just the sounds that are being filtered into their brain. But then there's all the other senses that are coming in as well. So the smells, what you can see, the movement, the balance, the taste, all these things coming into their brain. And what happens? Like, your brain is all beat up and you have a meltdown because you can't process all this information. Look, there's this big circle of it all coming in and only a little bit can go into your brain. Okay, so if we can take out, and I just took out the things that we have control over. So we don't really have control over the creaky floor, like not right now anyways, maybe long term. Like, you don't have any control over the traffic or the sirens. But you can see, like, if we eliminated more than 50% of the sounds that are being heard. Oops, it's supposed to be vestibular and proprioceptive, because again, you can't really have super amounts of control over some of that stuff either. But if you can, reduce smells, reduce what you're seeing, reduce what you're tasting. If you're cooking something very fragrant, what do we make here? Like curry, okay, a very spicy kind of smell. Open some windows, try to air it out. And now we have way less sensory stimuli coming into now our nice, happy brain, not our beat up, bruised, exhausted brain. So as much as possible, reduce that sensory input. I'm not going to go back to the last slide because it basically lists all the kinds of sensory input, which I made into a little graphic. So that is going to help phenomenally. If you haven't yet figured out the triggers, you might just have to do some trial and error. But when you do figure it out and when you can make those necessary changes, it's gonna have a very big impact. Okay, and then before we get into questions, I like to try to leave at least 15 minutes for questions. I like to talk about like recovery a little bit, because when your child's meltdown ends, you don't want, it's not helpful to immediately be like, okay, when your meltdown started, you were doing your math homework, so all right, time to get back to your math homework. Because if, I don't want to explain this, because like you go up the curve, right? Like you start to escalate and you go up, and it's like a roller coaster, and then you hit like a peak, and then you start to come back down. Okay, but when you're going down, you're still gaining speed, like a roller coaster, right? So at the bottom of the roller coaster, you can either pull into the place where you get off the roller coaster, or you can go up the next hill. And we don't want to go up that next hill. We want to stop and get off. Okay, so there has to be an opportunity for the kid to stop and get off the roller coaster. So if we go too quickly right back to having all the different sensory input, task demands by parents, siblings like poking at you, doing things that brothers and sisters do, before they've had a chance to get off their roller coaster, they're going to go right back up that next hill. So when possible, let your child determine when they're ready to re-engage, and whatever that means. So if it was like we were at the fair and we had to leave the fair because of the meltdown, so you're not gonna be like, okay, we're going back to the fair now. That's probably done for the day. Maybe if you catch it early enough, they can work their way through it in the car, and then they can rejoin the group. Or if it's like at dinner time, and if they say they're not ready to rejoin the family for dinner, unless you know otherwise, like, I would respect what your kid is telling you. I just say unless you know otherwise, because sometimes kids are just trying to get out of stuff too. Like, I don't want to go back to doing my math homework. I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to either. But we don't want to add any additional stressors that the kiddo might not be ready for. That does not mean they get out of doing whatever they're responsible for doing. Sometimes what they want to do and what was occurring when they were having a meltdown was something fun. Maybe they were playing a board game. And maybe the popping sound of the little bubble and what's that game? Sorry, Trouble. That's the one, Trouble. Was just like a little bit too much and pushed them over the top, right? So, but if you're playing a game with other people, you can't just stop playing. Like, that's not fair to other kids, right? So, when they're ready, maybe you come back to it. If they start to display warning signs again because they don't like that sound, maybe you just say, okay, each person is going to take 2 more turns, and then whoever is in the lead is going to be the one. Okay? Or maybe if it is something like math homework, maybe you sit and do it with them and you say, we're going to do 1 more math problem and then we can be done for the day. Even though you know that there's 4 math problems left, it's still letting them know that, they're still responsible for what they need to do, but we don't want to make it overwhelming. So say, like, why don't we just do 1? Why don't we read 1 page of the book that you have to do for school, or whatever it is. So we do have to return to it because that's just life. But not doing it too soon, not doing it too much, and maybe doing it with, instead of expecting them to do it on their own. That could be helpful for some people. And some kids, it might not be as obvious to recognize when they're able to kind of rejoin whatever it is that they were doing, or maybe just like get back to their normal routine and structure. So you could set up some kind of little task or action that they take that helps let other people know that they're ready. And this was a strategy that a family that I worked with used, because it was what they used at the kids' school. So if the kid needed to kind of separate himself and calm down and kind of self-soothe, when he was ready to come back to doing his schoolwork, and then they implemented it at home, he would have a little bin of different colored, I don't know what they were, they weren't Legos, some kind of block. And he would have to sort them by color. And when he sorted them all by color, that was how he knew, like, mentally, I can do what I need to do, and also communicate with at school with his teachers, like, okay, I'm ready, what's next? So they implemented something very similar at home. So if he was in his room, he liked to use his crash pad. He was banging himself into it. When he would calm down, he would sort his little things out, and then he would know, his parents would know that he was ready to go back to, his normal routine and schedule. And then, yeah, if you're not tracking, make a note of what led up to it, anything that seems important or different, or things that you need to, put on your data tracking chart when you get home, jot it on your hand, write it on the back of a napkin, anything like that, so you can make sure you get that data. Okay, this is my little meltdown management plan. So it has other graphics on it, but whatever, you can't, I don't think they downloaded right, but it just says, there's just a little place to put in, like, hi, my name's Debbie, this is my son, daughter, child, granddaughter, whatever your relationship is, niece, nephew, and their name is Bob. They're diagnosed with autism or whatever diagnosis they have that you want to share. You could just say they're differently abled. They have some sensory processing issues, whatever it is that you want to put there. This is a plan that's specific to, and then again, you click on it, it's a fillable form, you can put their name in. So describe what a meltdown looks like what other people can see and observe. So you don't want to put something like, they're having a meltdown because there's too much sensory stimuli and they can't process all that. Because to people who don't deal with this on a regular basis, they don't know what that means. So you could put something like, it might appear that my child is trying to hurt me, but they're, that's their way of expelling some of their sensory overstimulation. Or they might kick or hit. Please don't get too close, like they might spit or scratch, or just the things that are observable. So when someone else sees, like, oh, why is this kid like laying in the ground in the parking lot at Tops, and if you share this information, then they can be like, okay, this is what they do. I can't make anyone else accept that information. All you can do is provide them with the information and hope that they accept it. The circumstances in which it's most likely to occur. So if you know that it's likely to occur at like big stores or big busy events, things like that. What's helpful and what makes it better. So again, if somebody wants to be helpful, but it is not helpful to tell them that mommy will buy them any toy they want, maybe put on there that that's not helpful. I will email all of the information. I have all the email addresses and everything saved to Google Drive, so I actually just send the links. Or I can send them as attachments. If you have a preference, just type it in there, and then I will know. So what's not helpful, what makes it worse? How will other people know that you need help, and what can they do to help? So do you need help if you are You know, if I get knocked out, that means I need help. Or if I'm chasing my child who's running with scissors, that's an indication that I need help. Because sometimes things might look like something that they're not. I worked with a family. The youngster was completely nonverbal. His favorite thing to do was play tag. So the first time I met him, he walked up to me and whack on my arm. And I was like, what did I do? Why is he hitting me, right? And then he took off down the street. I was like, oh, he hit somebody. And now he's like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. And he took off. And then his family told me, they're like, oh, no, he tagged you. You're it. So I'm running down the street in the city, like chasing this kid because we're playing tag. So things aren't always what they look like. So someone might think like, oh, they need help. This kid is hitting them. But in this case, I didn't need help. I needed to chase the kiddo. So, and then again, what can they do to assist? Can they call someone for you? Can they get you a manager? Can they find your spouse or partner that is in the produce section? Whatever it is that they can do. And then if you need additional assistance, who can be called? And these like are cut off. They're like the size of a business card, so they like fit in or a credit card, so they fit in those little sections in your wallet. So it's just the contact person, and then what kind of car they have, because and this was an addition I made to this form, because there are times when someone would call or have someone else call for help, and they'd say just like pull up outside the store and we'll come and we'll throw them in the car and we'll get out of here. And maybe you have someone looking out, maybe someone else called for you, or they're going to come get you when they pull up. Well, how are they going to know when they get there? So if you can, even if you just say like, oh, I have a brown Kia Sportage, and you don't know the plate number or the year. Like, so if someone's helping you and, or you get a manager at the store, like, and there's a brown Kia Sportage that pulls up out front, they're going to be like, okay, let's help this parent get their kiddo out of the store now so they can try to get home safely. Or, gosh forbid, you can't find your car in a parking lot and your kid's having a meltdown. Whatever the circumstances might be, there's been more than one time when I've had to know people's vehicle information, whether it's I was responding to a crisis call at a public space and they're like, okay, well, we made it to the car, now we're just sitting in the parking lot. That's great. I don't have any idea what kind of car you have. Okay, so that can be very helpful information.